and then
Oh, it's
click
fixed.
that. Yeah, yeah.
It's fixed. So do you think it was recording that way in the beginning? Probably, huh?
Oh, I didn't
Maybe.
realize we were recording already.
Yeah, yeah. I always just start, because some of the beginning stuff's just fun anyway.
That's
You
true.
know, makes us look more human because we are human
That's true.
after all,
Yeah,
right?
you see me like adjusting my
Yeah,
shirt in
yeah, yeah,
the mirror and
yeah.
or in the
If
the
you pick your
camera and whatnot.
nose, there is the ability to edit. So
That's fair. Well, it's funny. I was doing a program like yesterday for Endeavor Virtual Lodge out of Australia, and I was just laser focused on my program on Masonic Research 101, and looked down and saw a stink bug crawling up my arm, and flipped out
oh my god,
live in front
stink
of
bugs.
like
Oh man,
115 people.
like you just stripped naked, like freaked out. I get all my
No, no,
clothes
no, no,
off.
no. I was just like, "Oh, what is that?" And
Yeah, yeah.
I flicked him away and made the throwaway comment about Cowans and eavesdroppers and not checking dues cards.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm not an insect guy at all. I like snakes and lizards actually. But I'm not a spider guy. I don't like spiders, even like small spiders that are, supposedly safe and don't bite or non-venomous. I just get creeped out by them and can completely freak out if one is on me. It's just one of those things. I don't know why. It's been like that since childhood.
Yeah, it's like I
So,
don't mind them per se, but it's just when you're focused on giving a presentation, and then you see that, it's
oh
just
yeah.
the unexpected
Wow.
gets you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. That'll throw you for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thank you, brother Jason Richards, for coming on the show. This is awesome. You're a well-known face in Masonry, particularly from the Masonic Round Table show, which I've been a fan of and watched for at least a couple years now, even before I became a Mason, in fact. And I think I've had the privilege of meeting you in person, and we've chatted and hung out, and we even saw the new Illuminati film together, which was
We
nice.
did,
Remember
yeah,
that?
down in
Yeah, that
Gainesville.
was cool.
Oh, it
Yeah,
was awesome. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Um, so I don't want to try to do you an entire introduction of you. I'd rather hear from you about yourself. I think a lot of people would like to know a little bit more about who's bro Jason Richards. Like who are you? Where do you come from? A little bit about biography of yourself, and then kind of lead into how you got into Freemasonry and what brought you to Freemasonry. I think that would be interesting.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So um for everybody wondering who Jason Richards is, I'm just a guy who nerds out on history, who's happy to be here and hanging out with people. Um, I've been a Mason for about 8 years now, Master Mason for about 8 years, 8.5 to 9 years for from the EA going forward. Um, really, really interesting to me, at least. Masonry goes back at least 5 generations of my family. It skipped my parents, except for my aunt, who is actually the sitting grand worthy matron of the Ohio Order of the Amaranth. So my aunt, and actually I think two of my aunts are very big into Order of the Eastern Star in Ohio. And then of course my one aunt Michelle is in the grand line or at the pinnacle of the grand line of Order of the Amaranth in Ohio as well. But I grew up always hearing about this organization known as Freemasonry, and my grandfather on my mom's side was a Shriner, Scottish Rite Mason, and my great grandfather was Mason, and great grandmother was an Order of the Eastern Star, and so I had grown up hearing about Masonry and hearing about Freemasonry, but I was never close enough since all of my relatives were in Ohio and I was in Central Virginia. I was never close enough, either physically or just from the family closeness standpoint to really be able to ask more about what the organization was. It was always just, oh, your grandfather was a Mason, on to the next topic. So
Yeah.
it wasn't really until I got into my career that I met Masons who I became friends with, and who were open and honest about Freemasonry. And I had the ability to enter into that relationship with them, where I was able to say, what is this Freemasonry thing all about? And so, moving into my career, I had been married for about a year. Um, all of my best friends from college, all of my best guy friends, my fraternity brothers, had scattered to the four winds of Virginia, as it were. Um, and I was looking for a nice cadre of good guy friends and good male role models to hang out with and spend time with, because I love my wife dearly, and she's awesome. Um, but I was looking for a little bit of male companionship as well to round out my my social life. And I had tried, hitting it off with folks at work, but they were really just interested in going and getting drunk at happy hours every Friday night, and I just wasn't really into that. So I was
That's
looking
different
for
from Masonry.
um, not different from the shrine, I guess, but
Right, right, right.
they do more nights a week.
Yes,
But
sure.
for from the companionship standpoint, I wasn't interested in a superficial drinking relationship. I was
Sure.
interested in a very deep, meaningful relationship with brethren who were intellectuals, who we could debate the finer points of life and religion and the mysteries with each
Mhm.
other.
That's great.
And so when I got into my career, I met a gentleman by the name of David Hill, who is a past master of my mother lodge, Acacia Lodge. And he was wearing an Acacia Lodge polo shirt one day, and we had become friends just through work. And he's like, yeah, I'm a third degree Master Mason. And at that point, I was like, wait, you need to tell me more. I've grown up with this, but I'm really, really interested. And so he got me Chris Hodap's book, Freemasons for Dummies, and we just started having regular conversations about Freemasonry. Interestingly enough, and I know we'll get to this more later, but I
Sure.
grew up in a very pseudo evangelical Christian household, and so I was very interested in what Christianity and Freemasonry had to do with each other, and what Freemasonry looked like from a Christian perspective. So
Hmm.
I realized, as I was looking, doing internet research on Freemasonry from a Christian perspective, that the literature was overwhelmingly negative on as far as Christianity's written views on Freemasonry. And so I went back to David and I said, hey David, I'm reading all this stuff that's overwhelmingly negative. Do you have any Christian Freemasons I could go talk to? He
Right.
said, yeah, I got this one guy. We'll go upstairs. He works in the building. We'll go upstairs and talk to him. And so we went up to the 8th floor, and he introduced me to Jonathan Ruark.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's where it all began, huh? Wow.
Yes. So that's how John and I first got introduced. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So it's kind of bloomed from there. Of course, I ended up petitioning after beginning that relationship with David and John, and really haven't looked back since. It's just been phenomenal. Um, I've just been
Awesome.
I've just been the guy who's been happy to be here, because I love Freemasonry, and I love the relationships that I've been able to cultivate, and the friendships I've been able
Absolutely.
to cultivate with this great organization that I'm a part of.
Yeah, that's great, brother. So, what about your like educational background and interests and stuff before you got into masonry? I mean,
Oh yeah, I
who
should
were
probably
you
talk about that
before
too.
masonry? Yeah. Besides growing up in an evangelical Christian household, which you stated. Yes.
um, so let's see, I've always loved history and political science. So I've always been fascinated with international cultures, and that stemmed from my parents moving to Germany with me when when I was
Yay.
about 7 years old. So
That's
yeah, it's
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah.
I was
Great
in Frankfurt.
experience.
Yeah, I was in Frankfurt for two
Yeah.
years. Actually, during the reunification of Germany, I was there from about 89 to 91, and
Wow.
yeah, 7 to 8 years old. But I ended up, since we were civilians, my dad went over with his company. I wasn't. Um, I wasn't going to school on base. I wasn't attending an international school. So I ended up going to kindergarten and first grade in the German elementary school system in the Grundschule. So it
Mm.
was total cultural language immersion.
Wow.
And yeah,
Wow.
it
Man.
was an amazing experience that formed the very foundation of who I am today. Just
Mm.
by learning about other cultures and recognizing
Yes.
immediately from childhood that there are other perspectives in this world that are vastly different from
Mm.
my own. You see so
Right.
many folks who have never left their own town, and they're just ignorant to the fact that the rest of the world doesn't operate the way they do. And I was privileged with my parents' decision to be able to break out of that very, very early. And so that's colored my perspective throughout my
Wow.
entire life. And
Wow.
as a result, I've grown up just being fascinated with other cultures, other traditions, other histories. Um, and so I ended up going into undergraduate work, wanting to do international affairs. But
Mm.
due to the school cutting the language program that I wanted to study, I ended up doing history instead, because international affairs had a
Wow.
3-year language requirement and history
Wow.
didn't. So I ended up
Wow.
doing a history major with a minor in Russian studies. And I wrote all of my papers from the standpoint of Russian history and Russian policy, and then went
Fascinating.
into to graduate school to do international security policy, focusing on Eurasian and transnational security threats.
Wow. What did that lead to, Jason?
I mean, it just it led to just being able to work with other cultures, studying other cultures as a
Mm.
research analyst. Just a lot of reading, a lot of writing papers, and then as a part of that journey through my career, I realized I was really, really interested and fascinated in the effect of technology on
Mm.
the world. So as I learned more about technology, about project management, program leadership, um, I kind of morphed myself from this research analyst type of work role into systems engineering, which is what I do now.
Interesting.
Yeah, so do a lot of systems engineering, project leadership,
I
and
see.
it's just I get to nerd out on technology. I get to deal with people from all over the world, and I get to take care of others, which are three things that I just absolutely love to do.
That's awesome. I think we have a lot in common. I also lived abroad a lot, particularly in West Africa. Spent about 12 years
Ooh.
living overseas. Yeah. And I was the international affairs guy. I worked for USAID for 8 years, doing international development, kind of what sounds like you might have been interested in at one point. But I didn't actually study that. It was just serendipity that I was living overseas. I had actually started a record label on African drumming, and I was living overseas working on that. And I had like a bed and breakfast where people would come from all over the world and study like traditional music from Mali, basically, and drum and dance primarily. And ended up meeting a guy, the mission director from USAID. And I had a past life of doing database development and GIS and IT stuff that I wanted to get away from. But when I met this guy and we went out for drinks, he wanted to know what my background was, and I told him all that, and he was like, "Ooh, we need all those skills in the mission." And so I
No, I
ended up
don't want
getting a
to do
job.
that.
Yeah, I know, but I needed the money though. I was trying to be an
Yeah.
artist, and a starving artist in Africa means like really starving, and so I needed that, and so I ended up working for aid for 8 years in Mali, and then in Senegal, and then in Cameroon, and I worked in Ethiopia for a while, and just traveled all over because of that work. And now I'm a contractor doing evaluations of aid projects overseas. That's what I do now. So I
Oh,
still
that's
travel a
so
lot,
cool.
not anymore. Yeah, it is cool. I learn a lot, and I can completely relate to your perspectives on the importance of understanding other perspectives through travel. And it reminded me of, in Masonry, we talk about, wanting to travel and earn Masonic wages. Um, and I think that's a really deep concept. I mean, especially, when we think of it in terms of speculative Freemasonry and non-operative, we don't mean actual pay like wages. I think the wages of a Mason are the wisdom you gain through Masonry, and the insights and the revelations you gain, and the new knowledge, and the development of your heart, and becoming a better person, and the peace and equanimity that brings you. Those are wages. That's what I want to be paid. And travel and experiencing other cultures help to develop yourself. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Oh man, no, we're in complete lockstep as far as our thinking on that is concerned. I've
Yeah.
never equated the wages of a master mason to being monetary, and unfortunately,
Mm.
that's a big misconception, worldwide with Freemasonry that's
Yes.
propagated by clandestine orders and folks pretending to be grandmasters of the Illuminati, etc.
Mm.
But yes,
Ooh.
you're spot on, Boo. You're
Yeah.
you're spot on with
Yeah.
the idea that Freemasonry as an organization that takes men and makes them better. Um, thereby the wages of a master mason are increased intellectual capacity and acuity,
Mm.
increased appreciation for diverse worldviews and perspectives, and just a better way of holistically viewing the world around you. And
Absolutely.
traveling as a mason is one of the best things you can do in order to gain those wages of just increased intellectual maturity.
That's right. And this is a question I wanted to ask you. It's a little out of order, but it
Okay.
seems related now. Because of COVID-19, we're all quarantined, right? So we're supposed to stay inside. This whole idea of social distancing, it seems to have a real strong antisocial aspect to it. Yet, in Freemasonry, if you're computer savvy and you have an internet connection and you're used to going online and you have an interest in learning and education in Masonry, and you have an interest to meet other brothers, there's a lot going on. And in fact, I feel like I'm connecting with a lot more brothers now in this virtual environment than I did, physically trying to visit lodges around me occasionally.
Yeah, I agree completely with you. I was musing with John and a couple other
Mm.
folks that since COVID-19, as far as a worldwide pandemic is concerned, since that situation kicked off, I have been visiting more lodges and speaking more to brethren and lodges than I was before
Hmm.
the social
Right.
distancing guidelines were put into place. And
Right.
for me, who is a young father, deeply entrenched in his vocation, that's awesome. Because when I would go speak at a lodge, lodges would be gracious enough to fly me out and pay for my lodging and whatnot, but I was still taking upwards of 2, sometimes 3 days of vacation of my
Hmm.
personal vacation to go out and speak to a lodge. And I was spending 2 to 3 days away from my wife and son. Now, what I can do is take 2 hours, Skype into a lodge, visit the brethren, speak, have some libations afterward as a virtual happy hour
Yeah.
and a good discussion, and then close my laptop and go right back to my family. Um, so
It's
the
incredible.
lodges aren't out the money for my travel and lodging, and I'm not out the vacation time or the time away from my wife and son, which is absolutely
It's
amazing.
incredible. It's incredible. And it makes me wonder if it's ever really going to go back to the way it was before. I mean, I'm sure it will to some degree, but we may opt to do things virtually more often, even when we don't have to anymore.
And I hope we do.
Uh-huh.
We had a great discussion at Endeavor Virtual Lodge in Australia yesterday on this exact point of
Oh,
what does Freemasonry in the future look like, and will we go back to the way it was? And my hope is sincerely that we don't. And not because I believe virtual masonry is in any way superior to face-to-face brick and mortar masonry. I've always said that I'm a huge champion of virtualized masonry, but it is not a replacement to face-to-face brick and mortar masonry where you're gathered with some of your best friends around a shared sacred space.
sure.
Um, my goal is that we elevate virtual masonry to a point where it's just another flavor of masonry that is that is a brother to, or in some ways equal to, brick and mortar masonry. It's just I see this as the difference between perhaps observant masonry, traditional observance masonry, and then the farm masonry of brethren coming in, in their overalls, and country lodge masonry. Those are two flavors of masonry,
Mm,
but I don't see one as inherently better or superior than the other. I think
that's right.
the goodness of masonry is
Yeah.
that um, there are so many ways to have your masonry. It's just I
Right.
we get ourselves into trouble when we start asserting that one Masonic experience is vastly superior to the other.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that some of the negative impressions some brothers may have about esoteric Masons and esotericism and Masonry is because of a perceived elitism or arrogance that comes from those folks. And I like how you talked about the overalls, the farm masonry type of concept versus what did you say, the traditional observant
Mm-hmm.
type masonry. Um, yeah, and I appreciate lodges that with real simple guys sitting around the table, enjoying fellowship and being kind with each other, and without having an overly intellectual conversation. I think that's actually important to have in balance. You need that too, because otherwise, if you get too heady, you stop becoming a human being in some ways, and as a Mason, we need to be flexible and be able to adapt to various situations and circumstances. And if you're only comfortable with someone that shares your deep intellectual thoughts, and you can't sit down with an older guy in his 80s and just talk about the weather, then I think that's somehow a weakness in you too. We have to sort of embrace everything that comes to us in life. And if the way I look at it is like whoever's sitting in front of me is there for a reason. And I tend to embrace that circumstance and fully engage with that person at the level that seems appropriate. And there's always something I can learn from that if I have that positive outlook.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I completely agree with that.
yeah.
It's that's there are we were doing an episode on Kabbalah
Mm,
in on the Masonic Round Table, and we were talking to Eric Diamond, who is a Kabbalist and one of the hosts of the Ex Oriente podcast, and he was telling us about how for Judaism, study of the Kabbalah is restricted to folks who are
right.
middle aged and older who have had those experiences, so you don't lose yourself in the quest for esoteric knowledge, because it
Mm,
can suck you in, and you can lose a
right.
little bit of yourself and your humanity, if you just devote yourself specifically to that. So yeah, everything is in balance, and I think
Yeah.
masonry, generally speaking, does a great job of letting people have that balance between fellowship, esoteric knowledge, and whatnot, and green beans, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Um, so okay, so you've had a lot of experience already with online masonry. Um, primarily through the Masonic Round Table. I'm not sure if there's anything else that you would say is primary besides that. Wouldn't that be your primary experience in online masonry? Like if you look at the vast majority of your experience online?
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah,
Masonic Round Table certainly takes the cake. I've done some writing here and there. I
right.
used to have a blog, but honestly, I just don't have time to do the writing that I want to. Um, so it's really the Masonic
Join the
Round
club.
Table is that, yeah,
Yeah.
the Masonic Round Table is that every single week, that's my online masonry.
So yeah, I'd love to hear from you about lessons you've learned from your experience in the Masonic Roundtable, like stuff you didn't know in the beginning, and then through your experience over time, you've learned. Maybe there are lessons about how you should engage online and things you should and shouldn't say, or lessons about the people that are going to stalk you, or I don't know, any kind of lessons that have come from that experience, because I'm sure you've got a lot of interesting things you've learned.
Well, first and foremost, the my experience on the Masonic Roundtable has been deeply humbling. Um, the idea that someone and a lot of someone's care enough about what I and the other four hosts have to say about Freemasonry and care enough to listen to us for upwards of an hour to an hour and a half every single week. That's their time that they could use to do anything else, but they are
Right.
choosing to spend time in
Mm.
fellowship with us and virtual fellowship with us. That's just a very, very humbling experience. And so, if nothing else, my time with the Masonic Roundtable has has enabled me to kind of check my ego and check myself quite a bit. Not just with with folks who let us know that that what we said on the show last night was completely incorrect, or try to tell us what we
Right.
said on the show 6 years ago was completely incorrect and we should go back and change it. Um, because
Right.
we're all fallible and we're not
Right.
experts by any stretch of the imagination,
No.
but just the sheer amount of participation we get with brethren from around the world who tune in, who send us feedback and suggestions, and the brethren who send us emails saying, you know what, I am a Freemason today because I found your show 3 years ago. We get those emails all the time, and every single time, it's just an incredibly humbling experience. So, that's really the first takeaway that I've gotten from the Masonic Roundtable is that there's so many awesome brothers out there, and talking to each one and getting the opportunity to hear their perspectives and their experiences is an incredibly valuable experience, and I'm very privileged to be in a position where I can talk about Freemasonry with as many brethren from different backgrounds as possible. um, I think another lesson learned is to do your research and caveat appropriately. One of the things that we make sure to say up front is hey, we're just us. We're doing our own research. We're not speaking on behalf of Freemasonry or any jurisdiction. This is us, sitting around talking about Freemasonry, and you can agree or disagree or have your own opinion. That's perfectly fine. Um, so, I think we get into trouble when we assert that our particular viewpoint is superior and
Right.
some great way to somebody else's. And it now if someone is propagating conspiracy theories or baseless opinions, and we're propagating research and fact based um, research, then yes, there is a discrepancy and a delta between the veracity of the information. But just we just have to make sure that we caveat things appropriately, and if nothing else, just make sure that folks know that, hey, this is one set of opinions, and you're welcome
Yeah.
to have your own.
Exactly. Exactly. And do you ever watch your shows? I mean, maybe you probably watch your shows maybe earlier on. I don't know if you still watch your shows. And in watching them, do you learn things about yourself, and do you make adjustments? Does this help you as a Mason or as a man to make improvements on your character, for example?
Um, it does. So I primarily watch myself um, to improve my stage presence, as it were.
Mm,
I am very bad with filler words, so it kills me every time I watch myself, because I invariably go, yeah, uh,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
so am working on that. Um,
Right. Well, can I sidetrack for a second? I mean, you might have
sure,
something else there, but
of
this
course.
whole thing, this whole we shouldn't say I've been thinking about that over the last 6 months or so, off and on. And when you think about it in terms of chanting, I mean, there are people that chant vowels and like om and things like that. I almost feel like that might be our way of getting in touch, or trying to recollect or get back in touch with the great mind. When you go, I mean, this is an esoteric interpretation, obviously, but nobody ever thinks, why is it that everyone goes, uh, when they're thinking, when they're not sure what's coming next? Why that sound? And
Hmm.
maybe it's not bad to do that. I don't know why people say it's bad. I guess maybe somebody could say it's distracting or something, but there's nothing to be distracted from, because there's nothing at that moment. It's just a pause. So yeah, I'm not so strict on that. I say sometimes, and I'm like, why do I need to stop? I don't know if it helps me.
For me, it's always been, I've always seen the use of filler words as being uncomfortable with silence.
Hmm.
So if I'm in the middle of a phrase, and the train up here is still boarding at the station while my mouth is in gear, which happens a
Hmm.
lot. I
Yes.
see I see the use of filler words as a, uh, response, because I don't want to close my mouth and be silent and just think, because my
Right. Because
concern
that
is
feels
that
awkward or
silence
whatever.
is going to be
Yes.
awkward. Yeah. So for me, no, for me, filler words are a way of continuing that thought while my mouth is catching up to, or while my brain is catching up to my mouth.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah. So,
I really like your
yeah.
perspective and your approach to it.
Who
It
knows? Yeah. Who
sounds
knows?
much better.
Yeah. I mean, because I actually have seen some brothers do presentations with like no ums at all. And I wonder, God, how do they do that? I mean, it's like, I guess you have to just be really quiet and intentional, and then have these spaces where there's nothing, and that's okay. You don't need yeah. So it's interesting. It's a debate. Um, at least in my own mind, but I think for a lot of people, there's not that much of a debate. They think, generally speaking, people say frown on the stuff. Um,
And
but I'm
part of
not too
that, by the
concerned.
way,
Yeah.
part of that also comes from the fact that in high school, late high school, I was a DJ for a local rock station down in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I grew up. So as part of that, dead air is the worst thing for you to be able to have on the radio. So I think part of that influenced my presentation and my speaking with filler words.
I see. Interesting. Um, okay. So now let's get to maybe Masonic education. I know you're very interested in Masonic education, and you put a lot of emphasis on it. Why is Masonic education important?
Wow. So I'm a
Does
nerd.
that sound like a familiar question to you?
It does sound like a familiar question. Maybe it's one that I told you to ask me.
Yes, teamwork.
This is like the behind the music of Just Masons.
Right, right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, there's a filler word
Yes.
for me. All right. What was the question again? No, I'm
Oh,
good.
Masonic education. Why is it
Yeah,
important?
yeah, Masonic education. For me, I'm a nerd and I love to learn new things. And selfishly, Masonic education gives me an excuse to just keep learning because I'm truly, truly fascinated by this organization, by this fraternity, by everything that Freemasonry touches, from history to philosophy to socio-cultural norms. It's just Freemasonry as an organization impacts so much and has been impacted by such a rich history of philosophy and uh, mysteries and all. It's just there's so much that you can study under the guise of Masonic education that selfishly Masonic education gives me an excuse to break away from my day to day in order to learn more and improve myself. But more so, and I talk about this in my Masonic Research 101 presentation. To me, we get asked the question, what are you here to do? What did you come here to do? And we're ultimately here as Masons to improve ourselves, because Masonry is an organization for self-improvement. It is a way for us to make ourselves better men, and we become better men by going back to an earlier point in this episode. We become better men by sharpening our mental acuity and diversifying our perspectives and becoming more intellectual men and better thinkers. And Masonic education is that way whereby we achieve that. So from my perspective, Masonic education is how we improve ourselves in Masonry, and that is why, to me, it is so vitally important to the continued, um, you know, thriving and flourishing of the Masonic fraternity and the brethren who are involved in it.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know what, one thing I was thinking about when you're saying that is, you were talking about how you're so fascinated by so many things and so many aspects, and there's a lot of these rabbit holes and aspects within masonry that you can explore, and it's like if you're a curious person, it's like a kid in a candy store. So much to do, so much to learn. But then I started thinking, well, not everybody's so curious. There's people out there that not a lot of things fascinate them. They don't find things fascinating. Um, why is that? What's the difference between somebody who's curious? I'm just speculating, right? I mean, just speculating, hypothetical here. Why are people curious? And some people don't have a lot of curiosity. They just don't care. Nothing really interests them. They're happy just being entertained, and they don't find things interesting or fascinating. And I've met people like that where you ask them, like my kids sometimes, I'm like, God, what are you interested in? I'm trying to get them to read books, and they don't want to read any books. I'm like, yeah, but all you got to do is find what interests you, and then find a book on that, and then you'll suddenly like reading. And they can't think of anything that really interests them, and that amazes me. I mean, these are kids. It's understandable a little more when they're kids, but as adults, what's going on?
So that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And just speculating off the top of my head, I think a lot of it comes down to how passionate a person is. I truly
Mm,
believe that everybody is interested in something. Everybody gravitates toward something,
mm,
and the level of passion in a person's personality dictates, um, perhaps um, how much they express that interest, or uh, how voraciously they attack that interest.
mm,
You can sit down with that 70-year-old in lodge who's just, they're not really interested in anything, but he's still in that lodge meeting. He's
mm,
still spending time at dinner with his brethren. So he
mm,
might not have that level of passion as part of his personality, but I guarantee you he's interested in being there and sitting with his brethren.
mm. Right.
So,
Well, yeah, yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I like how, no, I was going to say, I like how you connected it to passion. I think that's a really good insight there, that, being curious and an individual who would be fascinated by a number of things, or see how many things in this world can be viewed from a fascinating perspective. Um,
So
it somehow
I'm
relates to
very
your level of passion. Yeah,
yes, and so I'm a very excitable person, and
me
that
too.
that directly plays
Ah,
into me just thinking something's
yeah,
absolutely amazing and
right,
awesome, and shaking the camera and what
right.
whatnot.
Look
So
at that cup of coffee, amazing.
yeah, you know what? There are plenty of people I know who do exactly that. If you ever talk
Yeah,
to Joe Martinez or Brad Drew
mm,
about Nespresso,
yeah. A lot of passion.
yes, a lot of passion. Yeah, especially if you mention the word decaf to either of them. There's a lot of
Ooh,
passion thrown back in your face. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine that. My problem with these capsule machines is that they're never strong enough. Um, so I've always thought, someone should come out with a monster capsule or something like where it's like a full cup of grounds, that the water's going through, or half a cup or something for those that really want a strong coffee. Because if I use those little capsules like the standard ones, it's like water. I can't, it's just a waste.
That's why
Um,
you use a French press or
there you go.
you brew your own cold brew coffee.
Oh yeah, that'll be really strong and less acidic, right?
Yes.
Cold brew.
Yes.
Yes, which is a
Yeah,
good thing.
I have a cold I call it a cold brew coffee machine. It's a pitcher with a filter. It's a glorified
Yeah,
Brita pitcher. And
yeah.
you
I
let
have
that
I
steep
have the
for
same.
24 hours.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, you let it steep for 24 hours and it's ready to go, and very strong, but yet somehow smooth and
Yes.
drinkable. Is that what you're
Yep.
drinking right now?
No, I'm drinking Coca-Cola.
No rum in it?
No,
And it's too
not
early,
the
right?
yeah, it's too early for
Not
that.
at 9 a.m. Yes. Um, so, the other thing about coffee is a lot of people don't know there's two different kinds of beans. There's primarily Arabica and Robusta. And Robusta is considered a low quality bean. Most of the coffee we have, that we drink, is Arabica. Some espresso, they'll put like 10% Robusta in there, a little bit in the mix. But I think Robusta is coming from Africa. It's a hardier plant, can grow in a drier environment. The beans tend to be almost twice the size of Arabica beans, and they generally have twice the caffeine content as Arabica beans, but they taste quite different. They have a kind of a nutty taste. It's almost like a different plant, a different type of drink you're drinking in a way, even though it is in the same, I guess, family, or I don't know, species as the Arabica coffee bean. But they're also low acid naturally. So if you're looking for more jolt, less acid, and you can tolerate a unique taste, you can go with 100% Robusta, and that's often what I do. They grow a lot in Vietnam now. You can
Mhm.
order them online on Amazon. You can get 100% Robusta. They have a couple Vietnamese brands out there, um, and they vary in the quality. You might find one you really like, and it smells really good and roasted perfectly. Um, but yeah, if you drink a cup of that coffee, it can last like longer. Like you can go like 6, 7 hours feeling great from one cup. So just some, coffee advice. I don't know how that relates to masonry, but passion, having passion about things, right?
So is Robusta something that you picked up during your time in Africa? Is it something that's more widespread there than it is here?
No, no, I did pick it up in Africa, but not because I was in Africa. It's just because, I was online researching wherever I am, and I happened to be in Africa at the time. But that's when I discovered Robusta. But no, the Africans aren't drinking Robusta. They're drinking mostly Nescafe, to be honest, the instant stuff, because people are poor. Some of the wealthier African families, they buy the beans from the supermarché, the grocery store. They have the money to go shop in a grocery store, because in Africa, shopping in a grocery store is considered a luxury. And that's for like the expats or the wealthier Africans. And the vast majority of Africans shop in local markets, which is like farmers markets,
Mhm.
um, where everything's a lot cheaper and oftentimes a lot fresher and better quality too. Fortunately, I married an African woman, so my wife cooks a lot of good African food, which I
Ooh.
really enjoy. Yeah, I'm lucky in that regard. Um, and I also have a passion for cooking. I like to cook too, so we make a good couple in that sense. Um, okay, so getting back to masonry and COVID. God damn it, COVID. Yeah, everyone keeps having conversations about COVID. You know, it never seems to end, right? Um, and I hate to have that be a repeating theme, but it is a repeating theme
Mhm.
right now.
Well, we're living
Um,
through it, so yeah.
we're living through it, yeah, and it's really bizarre. And what are your thoughts on the impact of COVID on Freemasonry? I mean, I've talked about this, I think, in a past show, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So, man, COVID-19 and Freemasonry. COVID-19 has had what I hope to be an irreversible impact on Freemasonry, and not just from the standpoint of online Freemasonry. You know, of course, that's the low hanging fruit. That's the big change that everybody can see. You now have Grand Lodge jurisdictions across the U.S. Putting out edicts and guidance from the Grand Master's level, allowing lodges in those jurisdictions to hold their stated meetings via Zoom or WebEx or some other secure teleconferencing platform. And in January of this year, that would have never crossed anyone's minds that
Yeah.
within 4 months, within 3 to 4 months, you would be not only allowed to do so and not expelled or suspended for doing so, but you would be encouraged by your Grand Lodge leadership to do so. We're seeing that in Illinois, we're seeing that in Washington, D.C., we're seeing that in Ohio. Ohio is actually the first, I believe Ohio was the first state to issue that statement saying, okay, if you want your stated meetings, you can hold it over Zoom or over some sort of teleconferencing platform
but you
with
can't,
these restrictions and guidelines.
right, you can't do ritual, right?
No.
Obviously,
Well,
or
it
anything that looks
depends.
like ritual.
Yeah,
Or
it depends on the
uh
jurisdiction. There are a lot of jurisdictions that don't do the passwords or signs or anything
right.
like that. The secrets of Freemasonry, as we call them. Um, but you know, the fact that you can have a tiled meeting over a teleconferencing platform, you know, that's not new. Castle Island and the Dever Lodge have been doing that for years. But the fact that we actually have Grand Lodges now that are um, reacting to the COVID-19 pandemic by progressing and allowing that to happen, I think is huge, and it's something that I hope it's a flexibility and an appreciation of virtual fellowship that I hope doesn't go away when we ease the social distancing restrictions. Another impact that COVID-19 is having on Freemasonry, I think is also a positive impact, which is we are seeing a lot more good news stories, especially on social media, about brethren taking care of each other. You have brethren who are shut in, who cannot visit the grocery store. You have brethren taking PPE to hospitals and Masonic home organizations and things of that nature. And if nothing else, you know, the standpoint of Masons being there to not only help each other become better men, but just help each other. We're seeing that a lot more tangibly, at least on social media, with brethren just taking care of each other and living up to their respective oaths and obligations, which is another thing that I think is absolutely fantastic. It's a shame that it took a global pandemic to necessitate a lot of this, but the way the fraternity is reacting to COVID-19 on the aggregate is almost overwhelmingly positive. And
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, go
Feel
ahead.
free to
Continue.
tell
I'm just
feel
agreeing.
free to tell me to shut
Yeah.
up because I can talk.
No, no, no. No, this is great. Makes my job easier.
But you know,
Yeah.
and I think the lasting repercussions of COVID-19 are going to benefit the fraternity in the out years and in the long run, because we are forcing ourselves to adapt, and we're
Mm.
forcing ourselves to change the way we do business, and the embracing of technology, the added emphasis on taking care of our brothers, our widows, and orphans. I think those are all things that are going to resonate with the next cadre of Masons. So, in nothing else, we're
Yes.
getting out to online more. We're going to increase our ability to attract younger generations to Masonry because of it.
Oh, yes, exactly. And especially like, groups like Refracted Light that are really opening the door for so many people to learn more about Masonry. I think this is actually, I think Refracted Light, as it continues to grow, might cause a growth in people petitioning lodges to become Masons. We might see an uptick because of COVID after it's all over, of course. Um, but also your thoughts about brothers helping other brothers during this time reminds me of the whole mental health and Masonry thing during COVID. And yeah, it seems to me that and I said this to my wife and my mom, who both live with me, a few weeks ago, I think like a month ago or something, that there's going to be a lot of mental health problems, I think, because of COVID-19. I think a lot of people um, always thought that everything would be okay. They live in America, nothing bad could happen here. This happens in other countries, but our country is always stable. Everyone had this sort of surety about the situation and their sense of security as Americans. And I think that rug has been pulled out from under us all. And for people that like a lot of security and like a sense of security and like everything to be well organized and to want to be in control of everything, this is very challenging for those people. And people can get cuckoo. They can start losing their minds during this period because it's just bizarre. It's very bizarre. And so, I mean, maybe one way in which we as Masons should focus our efforts is around this mental health issue. And I think that some brothers like Randy Sanders and who's the other guy?
Chuck
Is
Dunning.
it Dunning? Yes,
Yeah,
thank you,
Chuck Dunning.
Chuck Dunning, and some others are really focusing on these issues, and I think that's great because they're real. Um, people are quarantined; they're stuck inside, getting stir crazy. Some people, poor people, might not have large residences, so everyone's kind of on top of each other constantly. Dysfunctional families have to be around each other all the time. This could lead to violence at home.
And there's
So
actually
yeah,
been a noted increase in domestic violence during this time.
wow, wow.
Yeah, law enforcement
I haven't
records have,
seen the
have
data.
actually said that.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Wow, wow. So that doesn't surprise me. What I'm curious to see is if there's an uptick in admissions to mental hospitals or calls to mental health centers. I'm assuming there would be, but I haven't seen the data.
Yeah, I don't have any data on that, so I don't feel it appropriate to speculate on that. But we
Sure.
do we
Yeah.
do know that COVID-19 is having a dramatic impact on mental health. Just and again, caveat everything, right? I'm not a mental health
Sure.
professional, but you can see just everybody has this specter of uncertainty. Um, we have folks who are not able to go to work, who have lost their jobs because they're not part of an essential business.
Right.
We have folks who are getting sick, who have loved ones and parents and family members who are getting sick and dying because of this, and there's so much we still don't know about how this virus works and how it operates, that it
Right.
there's that just heightens the uncertainty, because we as human beings like to have a plan. We like to say, okay, the next 2 weeks are going to suck, but after that, you know
Right.
it'll be good. We can push hard through that next 2 weeks, and that's just not the case here, which I think is
Yeah.
why you see uh, such a such a fight between differing points of views on the severity of the virus and the necessity of social distancing guidelines and recommendations. Just because there's we don't have enough information, I don't think, in order to know when that actual end is in sight. So people will take a look at those sources that confirm their personal biases. I do that too,
Yeah.
and they'll throw away the sources that don't confirm those biases, and it becomes very much an us versus them kind of political game. And so that infighting, just even on the severity of COVID-19 and the necessity of social distancing guidelines, is causing mental health issues as well, because it's one more thing for people to fight about and get
Right.
frustrated over.
Right. And, sometimes I wonder too, um, I feel like I'm in a bubble, like I'm in my house. I don't see COVID, I am not, working in a clinic or a hospital. So I never see it. Every day's, the air is getting fresher. Things look really wonderful outside. Almost like a Garden of Eden type situation. It makes you almost feel like, well, what's the problem? Everything's so nice. We should go back out. But at the same time, I'm in a bubble. I'm not seeing the other side. And there seems to be this whole other side that's happening. And so I think we need to somehow get some information there and make sure that we're getting information from the other side, and we're not letting just our personal experience color our perceptions about how things are going. But it's quite complicated.
Yeah, my best friend since childhood is an anesthesiologist working in Long Island,
Okay.
and um, I've been keeping in regular contact with him because I'm worried about him, being a
Sure.
medical provider in what is essentially the epicenter of COVID-19 in the United States. And it's been very eye-opening to have conversations with him, where he is talking about young kids with no noticeable underlying health conditions being on ventilators. And it's just one of those things where we all want to jump to conclusions, and we all want to know what's actually going on, because that really kind of downplays that uncertainty and makes us feel a whole lot better.
Mm.
But we're getting new information every single day. So what is true, and what we know about COVID-19 and the pandemic, and our reaction to it, has to change day by day as we get more information. And that includes the sense of uncertainty and the unsettling nature of the pandemic. So that's something that I've always found fascinating about
Yeah.
IT development and software development, being a systems engineer. What is the truth about the software baseline today is not going to be the truth of the software baseline tomorrow when we
Wow.
put that patch in, or when we push the new build to the operational system and it crashes because we didn't do our testing right.
Right.
So the idea that folks just want to know truth, but it's very, very hard to get absolute truth, if not impossible. And absolute static truth, I think, doesn't exist.
That's right. Yeah, that's why we have to embrace learning, dynamic learning throughout this process. It's important to continuously learn and then adapt as we learn. And your whole thing about the, IT baseline and, is always changing. Part of me is always excited about, getting a new computer, because I usually have a computer for 3, 4 years, and then I'll get a new one. And it's so exciting because I'm like, oh, now it's going to get faster. Everything's going to get faster. And then it kind of doesn't.
iPhone 6.
Yeah, interesting. So it kind of doesn't. It kind of doesn't sometimes, because I feel like what's happening is, as the hardware improves, software bloat continues. So they just make it more packed in software wise. And so you end up not really getting that increase in performance, because those bastards keep expanding what the software can do and how much memory it takes up and whatever. I almost wish the software would stay where you are and let the hardware get in advance. And then we can really see that performance increase. that we're all dreaming of, because I still have, delays and lags when I'm saving a video file or I'm exporting video. And it's like, what's going on? This was supposed to end years ago.
So
Maybe I'm just not
I
rich
think
enough to get the right computer. I don't know.
that's a chicken or the egg problem.
Wow.
Do we make advances in software? And we're really going off the deep end on a tangent here,
Sure.
but I'll
Yeah,
allow it.
totally. Like the coffee.
Yes. So do we make those advancements in software because we have the hardware that can handle it? Or are we pushed to advance our hardware because we want to do things with software that the hardware just can't handle?
Exactly.
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, to me, it's natural that it's frustrating because my battery life is miserable on my phone because the software and the operating system is so much better and so much more advanced and capable than it was 4 years ago when I got the phone.
And it just drains your battery.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So, okay, so maybe we'll pivot now to a little esoteric type discussion towards the end of this show. I always try to do a little bit of a dive into esoterica. I'm not going to go into anything real specific necessarily with you, but I know you've often said, I like a lot of topics and I'm a fan of history and whatever, but, honestly, I don't understand a lot of this esoterica stuff. And I'm like, wait, I've seen you do a presentation on the Noahide legends, which is kind of an esoteric topic, in my opinion. And you seem like a very analytical, you've done research and analysis a lot guy. So there's nothing intellectually preventing you, so to speak, from understanding esoteric topics. So I almost don't believe you when you say that. So I want to know more about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a long and drawn out answer, but we got the time. So
yes.
I'm very comfortable learning about people, learning about history, learning about really I'm almost an anthropologist at heart. I'm very, very interested in the human race and how we interact.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So for me, and I've gotten the same critique from Robert Johnson on the Masonic Round Table. He's like, dude, you say you're not an esoteric guy, but like your presentation on worldwide comparative flood mythology is esoteric. And I'm like,
there you go.
Really? because all I'm doing is studying history. Like I'm studying the history of oral traditions and how they change throughout culture and how they adapt to fit a certain cultural norm or sociocultural construct. And to me, that's straight up history and anthropology.
Yeah.
When I see esoterics, I think of Adam Goldman talking about secret sixes and numerology and Robert's work on the tetragrammaton, where he's assigning numbers to Jewish letters and coming up with new meanings. And I'm just like, cool. I have no way to vet whether or not that's true. As a historian, like you can always look for the source and say, okay, do I agree with that source or do I not agree with that source, and why? Are there other sources? We have ways as historians of piecing together the puzzle pieces of history and then making our best guess as to what actually happened. And I feel like with esoteric knowledge, especially with spirituality and deeply religious spiritual topics, I think a lot of that is personally it's very much experiential, vice data driven in some ways. So if someone has a religious experience or thinks or has some sort of spiritual connection that serves as a springboard for their esoteric research, that's not something that I scientifically can repeat. It's not a process that I can test scientifically. Whereas if I'm looking at history and legends and methodologies, I can test some of those hypotheses just by looking at different sources. And honestly, as historians, we have an easy out clause, which is, well, this is what the source says, but we don't really know. And I've become very comfortable, especially in all of my presentations, going, yeah,
Right.
this is the only source that we've found so far that corroborates this information. So take it with a grain of
Fascinating.
salt.
I understand better your perspective now. So you take a very rational and logical and scientific approach to processing information from your world, which is reasonable and rational. Um, what are your thoughts on intuition and revelation and direct insight? I mean, do you see
Not
those as
testable.
valid means? Not
I do.
testable, but you do
Not
see them as
testable.
valid means. Not testable necessarily.
Yeah, not testable, but not necessarily invalid at the same time. So for me, my being that rational intellectual type of thinker, I revert back to, okay, can we test it? Is there corroborating information? I like, it's just playing the odds. What are the odds of this source or this perspective actually being true? And I feel like when you come to deeply esoteric works, even like mainly P. Hall's Occult Anatomy of Man, and looking at the 33 vertebra and the numerology behind that, I'm just like, cool. We don't have any way to test the likelihood of that being a causal relationship or simply a coincidental correlation. And that's one of the things that make it difficult for me to get into esoterics.
I hear you. I hear
Even though
you.
I'm
Yeah,
trying.
you are trying. You are trying, and we're trying together. In fact, I mean, I know you've been exploring a little the Martinism side of things, and me too. Um, and I'm finding that information quite challenging myself, and I'm into esoteric stuff. But I've been watching some of Brother Paul Renna's
Mhm.
lectures online. I don't know if you've seen any of his presentations. They're excellent. I mean, they're so chock full of deep, profound information. I find myself not being able to pay attention sometimes. I'm constantly coming back, rewatching, and they're so dense too. I mean, it just shocks me how much research he's done, or the OMS in general maybe has done with his support. They're just so well organized, the materials, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, what are your first impressions? Because I know you're kind of looking at it too on the sidelines.
Yeah. Honestly, I haven't done a lot of research into his work, and for me, you know, trying to think of the best the best way to frame it off the cuff. For me, it's I've always had a hard time with spirituality in general,
Mm.
because I want to be able to test it, and I want to be able to know whether or not what I believe is in fact the right way to go about things. And I
Yeah,
credit
interesting. Yeah.
my pseudo evangelical childhood upbringing for that, because as a kid, I was taught, look, here's the Bible. It is the word of God, and if there's one word in this Bible that is untrue, you have to throw the entire thing out. And that mantra that was, you know really, that was just explored over and over and over with me in my childhood, has been the single biggest stumbling block to my quest for spirituality and a relationship with God. Just because from my comparative flood mythology research, from my conversations with intellectual brethren who have different perspectives and worldviews, I realize, and I've come to the conclusion that you cannot take the Bible literally, and to do so is being a bit intellectually dishonest. Given
Absolutely.
that the Old Testament is essentially a compilation of oral traditions that were written down in some cases millennia after we believe they first appeared. And so, from the standpoint of spirituality, I'm still wrestling with my own personal faith, and what that means in light of, perhaps looking at the Bible and looking at spiritual texts in general as more of an allegorical construct that, again, the interpretation of which can't be tested, which is the next issue. So that's been, very personally something that's been really frustrating to me over the past several years. As I've dipped my toes more into esoteric philosophy, I feel like I'm just kind of in an information gathering stage, and I'm waiting for this revelation where I can go, aha, this is my relationship with the creator. This is my spirituality, and this is my way to go. And I just haven't gotten that yet, and I don't think I'll ever get there, because I want to know that deep down, like what I believe and what my construct of spirituality is actually true, and I'll never get that.
Yeah, well, you never know. Uh, I mean, have you ever meditated? Have you ever meditated? Have you tried that?
Yes, actually, I'm very, very big into contemplative practices. Try to do meditation daily, fail quite a bit. But interestingly enough, I got into meditation back last year after reading a book by Andy Puddicombe, who is one of the leaders of Headspace, the Headspace app. And I noticed a serious difference in the days when I started off with a meditative contemplative practices, and those days that that I did not. Just taking upwards of even 5 to 10 minutes just to center yourself and refocus your mind and energies, gives you a perspective and an energy that carried me through most of the day on those days that I started off by doing some contemplative practices. Interestingly enough, I'm actually in the middle of a multi-week course by the Shalom Institute. And I'm taking this class with my pastors, which is also very interesting, and it's all about meditative contemplative practices and inserting those into your daily life. And so it's really, really interesting to be able to hear a pastoral and clergy perspective, even though
Right.
it's I think the Methodist Church, which is my current denomination, I think is a bit more open to exploring spirituality than my my former denomination was.
Cool. So, my sort of second to last question I wanted to talk to you about is, the roots of Masonry and where Mason really originated. I know that formally, formal Masonry as we sort of know it today started in the early 1700s and the Grand Lodge of England and such. But
1717-ish.
there you go. But some of the esoteric knowledge and the wisdom and the symbolism that's utilized in Masonry and sort of the meaning of Masonry seems to me to go back a lot further potentially. Some would argue to the time of ancient Egypt or even beyond. Some even go back to Adam and Eve, that this was the original knowledge that God instilled and concealed within mankind. What are your thoughts on how this deeper aspect of Masonry may be actually a lot more ancient?
So from my
I
perspective,
know you're
hindsight.
a data guy. I know you're a data guy. And I'm breaching the realm here a bit.
So hindsight is 2020, and we get into this again, chicken and the egg phenomenon of, okay, did the ancient mysteries exist because Adam was a Mason and Noah and his sons were Masons and Pythagoras was an enlightened priest and Mason? Did those ancient mysteries exist and because of Masonry and or does Masonry exist as an organization heavily influenced by those mysteries. If you look at modern speculative masonry as an outcropping of the Enlightenment era, the period of the Enlightenment and the 1600s was very much a response to the dogmatic nature of politics of the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation. And then you had Reformation and Counter Reformation, and the Enlightenment really was a hearkening back to philosophies of ancient Greece and an exploration of the ancient mysteries. So when you look at the tenets of Freemasonry as being directly influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment, a lot of those ancient uh, mysteries and mystical ideas and
That's a good point.
concepts were explored within the auspices of the Enlightenment. So I feel like that is the most uh, probabilistic way that those ancient mysteries got themselves, and the symbolism got themselves into the tenets of Freemasonry. Now, again, I like a data-driven approach. So yes, the ancient mysteries is uh, one hypothesis as to the foundation of Masonry. That you had the Enochian pillars upon which were inscribed all of the secrets of the crafts, including Masonry, that survived the flood. And the grandson of Noah, who was Hermes Trismegistus, found these pillars and got his knowledge that way. Um, for me, I like to. My question is, okay, where are the pillars and where are the sources? And we don't
Right.
have any. Okay. Um, for me, I like to take a look at the actual records we have depicting stone, that give us evidence of some sort
Right.
of Masonic fraternal guild system. And so what I do is I go back to Scotland when we have cathedrals as old as having been erected in the mid 1000s common era that have Masons marks still visible on their
Wow.
edifices. And of course, Masons marks were how Masons operating in a guild system got paid, because it was a marking of their work, and it was proof that they did the work. So from my standpoint, Masonry is at least as ancient as about 1050 common era, which is the approximate date of the oldest extant cathedral in Scotland that has Mason's marks still visible. And from my perspective, Freemasonry came right out of the Masonic, the stonemasons guild system. Um, Throughout from about 1000 to about 1600 common era, you had a guild system that thrived on building cathedrals all throughout Europe, with the Catholic Church as their benefactor, issuing warrants and charters, and we have all of this documentation, which again, it's testable. It's right there as a primary source. Then you get to the point where you have the Protestant Reformation. And the Protestant Reformation, of course, kicks off really in 1517. Scotland is a little bit backwards at the time, so it takes a while for the Protestant Reformation to actually get into Scotland. So it's about 1560 Common Era when the Protestant Reformation hits Scotland. And as Protestantism grows, Catholicism and the need for cathedrals and ornate rituals declines. And so you have that decline of ritual Catholicism and the decline of the need for stonemasons and the work for stonemasons, at the same time where you have the Enlightenment coming up, which is a reinvigoration of ancient mystical rites as well as ancient philosophies. And you start to get non-operative Masons who are admitted into guilds because the guilds need money, and the non-operatives, the lawyers and the landowners, are the ones who have the money to be able to keep the guild system afloat now that they don't have the Catholic Church as a benefactor. And at the same time, these non-operative Masons are bringing in the lessons learned from Neoplatonism and Rosicrucianism and Enlightenment philosophy, and they're taking the operative, on-the-job training that was, the stonemasons' initiation rituals, and they're adapting those tools and those concepts to fit more of a speculative spiritual awakening based on the Enlightenment. And over time, and we can see this because we have the records from Scottish Masonry, over time you see more and more non-operatives getting admitted into operative Masonic lodges until the point of 1736, when the Grand Lodge of Scotland is formed. And then from there, you just see a boom in speculative Masonry from the perspective of Scotland, to the point where, with the Industrial Revolution and steel construction, Masonry as a craft really declined heavily, to the point where Freemasonry became pretty much speculative only, by I would say the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so that's where I think we came from. And I base that off of the historical records that we have.
Right. And all that wisdom tradition, you allowed that in through the Enlightenment process, and the speculative.
It doesn't mean it's not valid. Yeah.
Yeah. So it did come into Masonry. And then there's the whole ritual. I mean, where'd that come from, right? Ritual. What are operative Masons doing ritual for? Okay. Think about that. These are just guys, builders, right? So what's going on? Why ritual? Why initiatory degrees? All of that stuff. And why secrecy? See, where did all this come from?
Secrecy. So we've got some historical sources that talk about that as well. If you look at the oldest extant charter that we have, I think it's dated early 1100s. I do like an hour-long presentation on this, but the dates are escaping me. I think it's early 1100s. We have the oldest operative guild charter, and right up front in the very first couple sentences, it talks about the purpose for the charter, and the purpose for the charter is to keep off gowns and eavesdroppers, because Masonry was a highly specialized art form and a highly specialized skill that required a great deal of work and to achieve, and a great deal of refinement. And there was a lot of money in stonemasonry. So you had all these guys coming up being like, hey, I'm a stonemason, I can build your cathedral, you can give me all that money. And there was no way to necessarily validate whether or not those stonemasons had really been entrusted with that proprietary information of stonemasons' guilds. So the charters were put into place, and lodge guild systems were formed and warranted under a charter to preserve that secrecy of the craft of stonemasonry, and to keep off those unskilled workmen and cowans and eavesdroppers. And we have that back as far as the early 1100s.
Sure. I mean, it's so interesting because you can always see an operative or speculative side, and an operative or speculative explanation for things kind of in parallel throughout history. Like when you were explaining that, obviously you're explaining it from an operative perspective, that, they had craft secrets, craft in that sense, meaning the actual physical building of, temples and whatever. And those secrets needed to be controlled, and only registered people. That's why the secrecy. And, but on another side,
there's a spiritual aspect to that too, though.
Sure. Go ahead.
So
that's what I wanted to talk about.
Sorry, I'm just cutting you off left and right.
No, that's good. No. I please do.
So part of the spiritual aspect of those stonemasons were, so stonemasons were by and large illiterate, but they were good, solid Catholics. And Catholicism, of course, is heavily steeped in ritual. So there's going to mass is very much a ritualistic experience in a sacred space, similar to going to lodge, as it were, today. At the time of the Protestant Reformation, a lot of that ritual just went away because Protestant Christianity was more of a focus on getting away from the grandeur of Catholicism, and really the ritual went by the wayside, and that left a bit of a ritualistic vacuum in the hearts of the stonemasons who grew up going to mass. And so that's why I think there was such an openness to the influx of Enlightenment philosophy, especially when you look at like the 1630s. Rosicrucianism comes onto the scene as a mystical, ritualistic branch of Christianity that really was a substitute to the ritualism that was inherent in Orthodox Christianity and Roman Catholicism. So I don't think any of these craftsmen were ignorant as far as the beauty of ritual was concerned, and so they saw that in their spiritual lives. They craved it. So, and this is untestable speculation, but it makes sense to me that if they truly valued their craft and dedicated themselves to the service to God as a spiritual pursuit, then they would want to model that ritualistic spiritual experience in their vocational duties.
I like that. And I would take it even beyond spiritual to esoteric, possibly. This is all speculation, of course, but if you think about the idea of as above, so below, there's always an operative and a sort of so-called speculative side of things. In other words, there's a more or higher level spiritual causation realm in this world, and then there's this material world where things actually happen. And if people were more in touch with that in the past, that divine connection we have to our material world and the higher realms, perhaps some of these operative Masons didn't see a contradiction in their physical building and the idea of building an inner temple. That always
absolutely
went hand in hand. Yeah, and that part of the secrecy and the initiation was to get into those mysteries also. And so that you were a fully qualified Mason. So you're not just an operative builder, which might seem kind of empty or shallow, that you had that depth to yourself and you had that depth to your understanding of what the craft is more broadly.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, the only way we can test that is by looking at the earliest rituals we have, which are dated to around the 1600s. Because of course in Scotland in the 1600s we had King James VI, who was at the same time the King of England as King James I. So that Bible on the altar is his edition of the Bible. And King James in Scotland was very, very interested in preserving the legacy and records of the craft, because the craft really just hadn't been keeping records up to that date. Many of the Masons were illiterate, but a lot of those records were also destroyed. Abbey records were destroyed in the rampant iconoclasm that followed the Protestant Reformation. So King James wanted to preserve the records of the craft, and so he brought in. I'm blanking on his name. It's going to come to me and I'm going to kick myself. He brought in the master of the works, William Shaw. There it is. It took a little bit of time. He brought in William Shaw to codify and standardize the stonemasons guilds. And as part of that, he wrote the Shaw statutes, which are some of the oldest of the old charges that we have in place that standardize the works of Scottish Masonry. And we also see early Scottish rituals coming on the scene at about the same time, at least as far as being written down is concerned, because of course the operative Masons, being mostly illiterate, they learned everything mouth to ear like we do in Virginia.
That's right. So the show's going quite long. We're about an hour and a half into it, but I think it's probably the longest show so far.
I'm okay with that.
It's a good conversation. I am too. I mean, Joe Rogan goes like 3 hours on his shows. Did you know that?
He
All
can
his shows
talk
are like
though.
3 hours. He can talk. Yeah, he can talk. And I'm wondering, I mean, he apparently gets away with it. I mean, he's doing pretty well. I mean, so he's kind of blew out all those rules that, attention span, people can't handle something longer than a half hour or an hour. Well, apparently that's not true because he's like the most popular podcaster now, right?
But he also subdivides a lot of his podcast into like 5-10 minute clips.
Oh, really? In what sense? Because I've watched them and it's continuous. I mean, from what I can
Well,
see.
yeah, it's continuous, but whenever I see, so I don't listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, but whenever I see it come up in my feed, it's like a 5-minute YouTube clip. So
Oh, I
that's
see.
how I
Oh,
ingest Joe
I see.
Rogan.
So there are options with him. You can chop it
Yeah,
up. You can get his Joe Rogan chopped up or the complete thing. Okay, I got you.
yeah.
Um, but there was a last thing I wanted to do. A little prayer. No, just kidding. Not that that
Okay.
would be a bad thing,
No.
but that's not what I'm gonna do. This is a joke, actually. I wanted to ask about your advice to Masons that are just coming out online for the first time, like myself, and others that are doing online presentations now for the first time, or others that are starting up their own podcasts, because there's a proliferation of that happening now, because people got the time, and that's the only way to do your masonry now is through the virtual means. So what kind of advice would you give to sort of up and coming brothers that are trying to tread this water?
Ooh, I love
Yeah.
giving advice. No, wow. So the first piece of advice that I have to give folks is experiment and iterate. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to have hardly anything figured out on day one. We certainly didn't on the Masonic Round Table. If you go back and listen to our first couple weeks of episodes, they're painful, and that I'd like to think we've gotten much better because we've been able to iterate and pivot. We've thrown different segments out that were a hallmark of the show. Even 3 years in, like Masonic News, we're constantly trying to iterate and transform what we do to as far as meeting the needs of our listeners. And so to that end, for folks who are starting out, who are doing a new show or thinking about it, don't carbon copy the shows that have gone before. Make it your own. Don't think, well, the Masonic Round Table or the Masonic Light podcast or Ex Oriente or Whence Came You, they were all popular, so if I want to be popular too, I'm going to do exactly what they did. No, that's the wrong way to go about it, because you're just inserting competition and putting yourself and your value proposition at an equal format to something that has much more longevity and much more of a dedicated base. And that makes it harder for you to break in to the market if you just copy somebody else who has a dedicated fan base. You need to make yourself unique and find that unique niche.
Yes.
And so that's super important. Like Jeremy with your show, Just Masons, just having a conversation between two brothers where you just talk about a little bit of esoterics and a lot of just meandering, thoughtful conversation. That is a unique value proposition that we don't have today. You have the Winding Stairs, which has conversations about self-improvement, and it's solely focused on self-improvement. You have Whence Came You, which is focused on reading papers and reading enlightening papers. You have Ex Oriente, which is focused a lot on sociocultural issues in the craft and Freemasonry. And so you can see, Historical Light talks everything Masonic history. Masonic Light podcast is just a cheerful conversation among brothers who are wacky and zany and do awesome stuff. And so you have to find your specific niche and your value proposition that will make you worth listening to. And I'm not saying you're not worth listening to without that. But everybody has something that's worth listening to, I think. But you need, from a market standpoint, to make sure that you're providing a unique service that someone can't get anywhere else, because that's why someone would choose to listen to you, vice that one podcast that they've been listening to for 8 years already.
I think
And
that's right on, man. That you just nailed it. And I think some of that comes from self-confidence and believing in yourself and not worrying what others are going to think of you. If you're always trying to think of what others are going to think of you, you're going to be real standardized and you're going to copy whatever's the most mainstream or whatever's the most popular thing. Yeah, and I agree. That's not going to get you very far.
Find what the Masonic Round Table doesn't give you, and
Right.
if that's interesting to you, do that.
Yeah, there you go. And also, don't be afraid if your shtick is very specific and unique and you've got a show that's really different from everybody else's and you're worried that you're not going to get enough viewers. I think if you have a passion for it, and you start off with a small group of people that also share a similar passion, you'd be surprised if you nurse something like that, how it can grow over time, because it's so authentic. And it's rich in its own uniqueness, you know?
And if you're doing this to become famous or become a superstar, you chose the wrong market. Like Freemasonry,
all right, we're gonna have to end the show then.
Yeah,
I think I should just shut down because that's why I started.
But so that's the thing, though. When you look at Freemasonry as a business market, and everybody's like, Freemasonry is not a business. Freemasonry provides a service, whether you recognize it or not. And I know you like to, folks like to say, well, Freemasonry is just so much more. At the end of the day, it provides spiritual growth and personal development as a service. Just taking a look at the number of Freemasons, going back to testable data, taking a look at the number of Freemasons across the world being, I don't even know, 3.3 million Freemasons, I believe, in the United States, as a subset of the entire world's population. When you compare the number of Freemasons who would be interested in a Masonic podcast to the number of people who own Honda Civics and would be very interested in like a car talk type of show, there's so many more or less there's so many less exclusionary markets that you could cater to. So
yeah,
you're not going to become a superstar with millions upon millions upon millions of views if you're just catering to a market that only has 3.3 million viewers in the United States, most of which are older than 60.
Right.
So
right,
you have to frame it appropriately. And I think just about everybody who does this for the love of the craft and the love of the people. And as long as you center yourself on why you're doing it, and hold on to that love of Masonry and that love of your brothers, then it just makes it that much easier to keep doing, and it makes it that much more worth it.
That's awesome, man. So that was excellent advice. Thank you, brother. This has been a fabulous show. I've had a great time. I got a good start to my morning, had a couple cups of coffee. And I want to have you back on. Do you have a coffee?
I would absolutely love to come back.
Sweet, bro. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. This has been
peace,
fantastic.
Brother. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much.